As you walked in, you saw some of the original style looms that we're famous for. Iconic brand White Oak is around the world, and the fabric that we make here. For those of you who are not familiar, this facility was opened in 1905. Cohen started production in 1891. This facility was opened in 1905, so we've been making denim in this facility continuously for over 100 years. It is a symbol for us. It's our heritage, our fortitude, and our innovation in the denim market in the United States, clearly in the textile market in the United States. People look at the White Oak brand as being one of the most important brands in the denim business on a global basis, which is really very exciting. ITG is the owner. Currently, the Cohen Mills and Burlington are under an umbrella called ITG, International Textile Group. The group has seven U.S. facilities besides this one, including this one, 3 Mexican facilities, and 2 Chinese facilities. Besides denim, we make fabrics that are used for military end uses, for protective products, fire turnout gear, active wear products in the outdoor marketplace, automotive products, airbags and seat belts, as well as products that are used in clean rooms and medical environments around the world. We got the opportunity from NCTO to host this event, and we quickly took advantage of it. As many of you know, today we'll be talking, or we will be addressing some of the issues surrounding currency manipulation, and that's a critical issue for us as a global participant in the textile business. Because it distorts the global marketplace, and that distortion, it's a nice word for what goes on, that distortion can make us very uncompetitive at times. We welcome the opportunity to bring together representatives from the textile business, and thank you all for coming today, as well as automotive and steel industries, and hopefully together we can help educate the elected officials, the media, and the general population about the issues that we have to deal with every day in these very difficult competitive marketplaces. It's a great pleasure that I turn over the program to Mr. Tentillo, Augie Tentillo, the president of the NCTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much, Jeff and Cohen Mills and the International Textile Group for this opportunity. As mentioned, my name is Augie Tentillo. I'm president of the National Council of Textile Organizations. It is my great privilege to join with the heads of 2 other major industrial trade associations in this venture, in this effort. We have with us Matt Blunt, who is the former governor of the state of Missouri, who now heads as president of the American Auto Policy Council, and Mr. Tom Gibson, who is president of the American Iron and Steel Institute, and you're going to hear from both of them in just a few moments. I do want to recognize a number of other dignitaries who have joined us this morning. We're very pleased to have a substantial gathering of staff from various North Carolina congressional offices. It's my understanding that we have representation from the office of Senator Kay Hagan, the office of Richard Burr, the office of Congressman George Holding, Congressman Patrick McHenry, Richard Hudson, Robert Pittenger, and of course Howard Coble's office is represented here also. If I've forgotten someone, I apologize. Hopefully I've covered all the congressional offices. I also want to recognize a couple of state officials and local officials. We have Hank Henning from the Guilford County Commissioner's Office. Thank you for being here. And John Loyak, who is with the North Carolina Economic Development Partnership. We do appreciate your presence. The U.S. manufacturing base employs 17.4 million workers and contributes over $2 trillion a year to our national economy. However, U.S. manufacturing employment, investment, and output is undermined by an unfair, illegal practice known as currency manipulation. A very quick definition of that problem is simply when a foreign country decides to predetermine or establish its currency rate or the value of its currency at an artificially low level. And they do that for the specific purpose of making their products and exports cheaper when they ship them to international markets, such as the U.S., and for the purpose of making our products that we export to their market much more expensive, therefore giving them an artificial and unfair advantage. I'm going to talk to you for just a few moments about the textile sector and how this problem directly affects us. The National Council of Textile Organizations represents the entirety of the U.S. textile production chain. That means that we represent people who produce various fibers: polyester, nylon, cotton, wool. Those fibers are then taken and spun into yarns. Those yarns are then woven or knit into fabrics. Those fabrics are then dyed, finished, printed, and eventually cut and sewn into thousands of in-use applications. Many more than the average person would think of. Those fabrics obviously go into the clothes we're wearing, but they also go into the homes that we live in the form of carpeting, drapery, bed and bath products. They go into automobiles. They go into carpeting and headliners and seating fabrics in the auto sector. They have technical and industrial uses. They're used for construction and roofing products, for oil and mineral filtration applications. They go into upholstery for furniture. They go into outdoor recreational uses. They go into aerospace and medical applications. And most importantly, or probably most importantly, they support the U.S. military. The U.S. textile industry supplies 8,000 different items to the U.S. military. Everything from flame retardant uniforms that protect our warfighters, to parachutes, to temporary tenting and shelters, to the ballistic vests that our military wear. All come from textile fibers and textile products. Our industry is a vibrant and growing one. We, with our downstream customer, the apparel sector, we employ 500,000 U.S. workers. We employ or support another 1 million jobs on top of that in terms of transportation and chemicals and machinery, items and areas that directly support our industry. We produce $70 billion in output for the U.S. economy on an annual basis. And we export over a third of that, $24 billion in 2013, went offshore. And while our industry is growing and while it's vibrant, if you were looking for a poster child for a sector that has been directly impacted by unfair currency manipulation, we would be a leading candidate. If you go back to 1998, there was a rather dramatic international economic crisis. It was called the Asian currency crisis. Because of poor economic fundamentals, a lot of Asian countries experienced a downturn in their economies and their currencies went into a free fall. Many of these Asian currencies dropped by 25, 30, even 50% in a matter of weeks. And what that meant was that their products became cheaper by 25, 30, 50% almost overnight. That created a herd mentality on the part of importers and retailers who are already enticed by low wages and low environmental standards and workplace standards to begin to shift even more of their sourcing out of North America and into Asia. Now, some of those countries allowed their currency to float back to a reasonable level, but others became addicted to the abnormal export growth and addicted to the massive trade surpluses that they could garner as a result of this artificial advantage. And so some of those countries have purposely kept their currency at an exchange rate that is dramatically below its true value. I mentioned to you that we employ 500,000 people in the United States and we produce $70 billion in output. In 1998, we employed 1.3 million workers and we had $130 billion in output. Over that time period, we have seen a downsizing, obviously, of our industry. And there have been a number of factors. But currency devaluation has been a dramatic factor in relation to that problem. It's time for the U.S. government to address this issue. It affects every manufacturing sector, every state, every congressional district. We're calling for both houses of Congress, both parties, and the White House to come together and finally solve this issue in a fashion that doesn't give us a handout, but simply puts us back into a competitive position that is fair and balanced. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to ask Matt to pick up from there. Thanks, Augie.
Thanks, Augie, and thanks for letting me be here with you today in North Carolina. We certainly appreciate your leadership on this issue across the country and certainly in our nation's capital. As Augie said, I'm Matt Blunt. I'm the former governor of Missouri and also the president of the American Automotive Policy Council. And this is a critical issue for us, and that's why we're engaged in this effort to reach out to folks and explain to them how important this is to address. Manufacturing is alive and well in the United States of America. Over 17 million jobs, as Augie mentioned, are employed in manufacturing. That's 1 out of 6 American private sector jobs. More than 12 million Americans are directly employed in manufacturing, so essentially about 9% of the total workforce. My industry is a nationwide industry. We have 8 million jobs in the United States supported by the auto sector as a whole. 2 out of 3 American auto workers work for Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors, the companies that I work for. And a number of those jobs support the over 25,000 auto supplier jobs that are right here in North Carolina. So we are alive and well as a sector, the manufacturing sector, and also in exporting. My industry is very much in favor of free trade. We've endorsed every free trade agreement that the United States currently has. We export more cars and parts from the United States than anything else. It's about $140 billion in production that's exported on an annual basis. So we believe in free trade, but we also see currency manipulation as a major and significant impediment to the free trade that we want to see. And we're not alone. Other organizations have cited currency manipulation as a major problem. The nonpartisan Peterson Institute for the Study of International Economics published a study stating that currency manipulation has already cost as many as 5 million American jobs. It really affects our industry in 3 ways. It's an unearned subsidy for cheaper imports into the United States. It's a further barrier to closed markets like the Japanese auto market. And then, as I mentioned, since we export so many cars and parts, it really affects us in these third markets around the world, like the Middle East and other places where we can compete head-to-head with our foreign competitors. So it has a dramatic impact on our industry and is one of our highest public policy priorities to address. And as you might imagine, on the price of a vehicle, when a country weakens artificially their currency, it can be thousands of dollars. It can be a subsidy of thousands of dollars because of the price of the average car in the United States today. So as the United States negotiates and completes the negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we think it's critical that the administration listen to the Congress. A bipartisan, bicameral majority of the United States Congress has told the administration that they believe strong and enforceable currency disciplines should be placed in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we believe it's vital that they listen to those members. Augie mentioned a number of the members that are represented here today. All those members have either signed letters to the administration or issued public statements calling on the administration to address currency manipulation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So we're certainly grateful to Senators Burr and Hagan and others that have said that this must be addressed. There was an addition, I mentioned the Peterson Institute study, and there was actually a study by another group called EPI. And in the EPI study, they actually said if the United States would address currency manipulation, you could see the creation of more than, perhaps as many as 5 million jobs in the United States. And then they actually went through and broke it out by congressional district and by state, and concluded that as many as 170,000 of those jobs could be right here in North Carolina. So the impact on currency manipulation is real and dramatic. The benefit, if we can successfully address it through the TPP and other channels, could be substantial for the American economy. And that's why we're united as manufacturing trade associations on this issue. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we'll be happy to answer questions in a few moments after we hear from Tom Gibson, who's the president of the American Iron and Steel Institute. Tom?
Thanks, Matt. Well, not everything's been said, but not everyone has said it, so I'm going to carry some of the same messages. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Augie. Thanks for our host. I've got to say, while our speakers were speaking, I'm quite taken with this poster back here from World War II. It's Spirit of 43, Work Will Win. Still a great message. My dad served in the Navy in World War II. Maybe he served in a uniform that was created here. I'd like to think he was. Steel and other manufacturing industries are still America's job engine and the cornerstone of the economy. So let me talk about steel a little bit. There's over 153,000 direct steel jobs today in the United States. We're making as much steel in the United States as we were in 1943. And every job in the steel industry supports 7 more throughout the economy. So we support over 1 million jobs in the U.S. economy. That includes 2,600 direct steel jobs right here in North Carolina, with workers at Nucor, Gerdau, ArcelorMittal, and Harsco. However, America's steel producers and their workers are under attack from surging imports, benefiting from unfair trade practices, and currency manipulation is at the top of the list. Currency manipulation is effectively a subsidy, which can put American manufacturers at an unfair disadvantage in the global marketplace. Ending that subsidy, however, would create jobs in every state, including North Carolina. Matt's already cited the Economic Policy Institute study. It says that eliminating currency manipulation would reduce the U.S. trade deficit by as much as $500 billion in 3 years. This would increase the U.S. GDP by between $288 billion and $720 billion, and create as many as 5.8 million jobs, and about 40% of those jobs would be in manufacturing. China in particular continues to protect and increase its exports by manipulating its currency, which has contributed to a more than 30% increase in total steel imports over last year when they were already too high. Total steel imports now have reached 28% of the U.S. market, and that is not a sustainable level. This is particularly troubling to us, given that U.S. steel producers are only using about 78% of their production capacity. In order to remain internationally competitive, we need the administration to insist that our trading partners are held accountable when they manipulate their currencies to gain an unfair trade advantage in our markets. We've heard a lot of talk from the administration on this issue, but we haven't yet seen any definitive action that would show America's workers that its government is taking concrete action and is committed to their jobs. So Congress must continue to demand that the administration include strong currency provisions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And speaking for AISI, I'd also add that Congress must pass legislation to make clear that there's already a remedy under current law for old trade agreements and for the WTO for currency manipulation. If currency manipulation is effectively addressed in new trade agreements, it could lower the U.S. trade deficit, boost U.S. economic growth, U.S. exports, and lead to more American jobs. The people of North Carolina should need to join with their senators, congressmen, local officials, and local businesses to tell the Obama administration to act now on currency manipulation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and in future trade talks. And with that, I'd like to also thank the congressional staff and the leaders that are assembled here. It's a vitally important issue. The leverage that you bring to this issue when you engage on it back in D.C. helps all of us to our jobs. So thank you for committing your time today to this effort. And with that, I think Augie, we're ready to take questions.
Any questions?
describe the leverage that you think we have as a country to stop these countries from practicing currency manipulation.
Sure. Well, and to begin, in the negotiations of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I think we have tremendous leverage, and all too often we approach trade negotiations as if we don't, when in fact we do. We have the largest economy in the world, a consumer-driven economy that countries want access to, and a free trade agreement gives other countries preferential access to the American market. It's something they desperately want. And what we're saying is you shouldn't allow them to have this preferential access to the American market if they're going to continue to manipulate and devalue their currencies. And really, I think this is about allowing the marketplace to work. Stop government intervention that undermines the value of currencies and allow the marketplace to set the value of the currency. So I think we have a lot of leverage, and it's the American consumer and the American consumers, consumer-driven economy, and the administration needs to use that leverage to ensure there's strong enforceable currency disciplines in the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
You talked about the impact on industries such as the ones you represent. What's the impact on American consumer of this currency manipulation?
Well, it certainly has tremendous impact on the American worker. We mentioned the Peterson Institute study that suggested half the excess unemployment in the economy can be traced back to currency manipulation. As many as 5 million American jobs have been lost because of currency manipulation. And it certainly affects manufacturing, but it's broader than that. In the EPI study I mentioned, they said a number of the jobs that could be created were in agriculture, and sectors you don't always think about having an impact because of currency manipulation. So it's a broad impact across the country, and certainly it's affected North Carolina tremendously.
And I think there is another angle to that question. It's an excellent question. When you look at some of the practical aspects of our economy and our society today, there's any number of issues that jump out at you. One is the healthcare crisis. Why are there 50 million Americans who don't have healthcare? Mainly because the manufacturing base was the supplier of healthcare to the greatest degree for the private sector. When you downsize the manufacturing base, this is a byproduct of that development. If we don't have rational policies that allow manufacturers to invest and to employ, then you'll begin to see a ripple effect, as we already have, throughout the economy in many areas. Another specific area, people don't recognize it or make the connection, college education. When you take the largest taxpayer, which might be a manufacturing entity, out of the tax base of North Carolina or out of a county, that means that the costs for the services and the programs that the state is associated with now go up for everybody else. Because the state of North Carolina or South Carolina or Virginia has lost tax revenue from the manufacturing base due to currency manipulation, they then have to raise the cost of tuition on the average student who goes and attends that institution of higher learning. People don't make those connections, but they're everyday and they're real. We are paying the price in terms of a hidden cost every time a manufacturer goes out of business because of some unfair international trade practice.
Again, I agree. The currency manipulation really is about job destruction. It is an advantage that foreign governments take for themselves. It can be a quite sizable advantage to participate in this market and sell their products here with the built-in, depending on the country, say a 25% advantage in cost. So it's about job destruction here. Every time you employ somebody in a manufacturing job, these are high-paying, high-skilled, high-technology jobs. That has a leverage effect throughout the economy, from the dry cleaner to the grocer to the restaurant on Main Street. So this is something we need to get right. When you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that's prospective. It's theoretically going to be the trade agreement that becomes the model for future trade agreements. We have other countries that are already actively trying to join it. Possibly in the future, we might have China try to join it. So whatever's happened in the past, we need to get currency manipulation, a strong discipline in it, for it, in this trade agreement, since it's going to be the model for what goes forward. That's the leverage. This is the leverage point.
I commend you, gentlemen, and your associations for coming together to raise awareness for this issue, which, to my knowledge, has been going on forever, but with little results. What kind of feedback are you getting from trade negotiators, the administration, et cetera, on this issue, as it relates to specifically TPP and other TTIP?
As we have jointly mentioned, we're thrilled with the response that we've gotten to a large degree from Capitol Hill. There has been a bipartisan outcry for a solution. Now, we would like to see that translated into a specific remedy, either through a legislative, or I'll speak for NCTO, a legislative solution. And of course, every free trade agreement we feel has to include some provision in here that keeps currency manipulation from mitigating or undermining any of the benefits that would have been associated with that agreement. So we're very pleased with the bipartisan approach. It is now time to translate that into action on the part of the administration and on the part of congressional leaders, to be honest with you, to get a solution or remedy to this problem.
Just to echo, I mean, the North Carolina delegation has been unified to a large extent on this, and with both senators and a number of members of the Congress making their position clear to the administration. It is time for the administration to act and for trade negotiators to heed the wisdom of Congress on this issue and really bring to the negotiating table a strong enforceable currency discipline to include in the agreement. As an association, we won't support, even though we've supported every free trade agreement the United States has, and are ardent free traders, we won't support a trans-Pacific partnership that doesn't include a strong enforceable currency discipline.
And administrations, all administrations know that any trade agreement is going to have to go to Congress for approval. Either it's going to have, they're going to have to get the fast track authority reinstated, or else they'll have to put TPP up for an up or down vote in an amendable form. And a bipartisan majority of both houses has expressed its opinion to the administration that any agreement has to have a strong currency discipline in it. Trade negotiations aren't the most transparent kind of process sometimes. We were coming up on another round, ministerial round that's been announced, I believe, for Vietnam. There are a raft of issues that need to be solved, but this remains a very high priority for us. It's a very high priority for the Congress, and I think therefore it's going to have to be a very high priority for the administration. But that's why we're here, is to make sure that we keep the pressure on.
Any other questions? Questions from the audience other than press?
I have a question. Just, I can agree with this currency manipulation, and I think we've got agreement with Congress and the general public, but and something needs to be done about it. Do you have a suggestion or a mechanism that can be employed that would even play?
So we actually do. We worked with Peterson Institute and other economists to craft a discipline that we think can be inserted in future free trade agreements like the TPP that wouldn't in any way undermine any country's ability to have a sovereign monetary policy or use tools like quantitative easing, but would be an enforceable, practical discipline. And essentially, as we've called for a three-part test that I can run through very quickly. The three-part test has 3 questions, as you might suspect. The first question is, does the country in the trade agreement have a current account surplus, which there's nothing inherently wrong with, but it really sets the stage for other 2 questions. If you have a current account surplus, do you have sufficient foreign exchange reserves, which we define as 3 months of imports? And then really I think the critical question is, if you have a current account surplus and you have sufficient foreign exchange reserves, do did you buy additional foreign currency and add to those reserves over a 6-month period? And we think every economist would agree that the only reason, with rare exception, that you would do that you would buy foreign exchange reserves when you have sufficient reserves and a current account surplus, is to devalue your currency to get a trade advantage. So that's the test we would propose, and then our penalty would be that if you violated that test, you would lose the advantages of the trade agreement for a year, the tariff benefits of the trade agreement for a year. You'd go back to the most favored nation trade tariff that existed before. So we think that's a draconian, it's not a draconian penalty, but we do think it's a sufficient one to try and stop the currency manipulation that occurs. So that's a great question because it drives home the point. This is an easy issue to talk about, but we think there's a practical, pragmatic way to address some of the most egregious currency manipulation which occurs in free trade agreements. And we've had a number of people validate it, a number of members have endorsed it. People know that our solution will work, and we would encourage negotiators to bring it to the negotiating table and try and include it in the TPP.
And Pete, we've looked at some, NCTO has looked at some legislative solutions in addition to whatever could be inserted into a trade agreement. The basic point is that all of the remedies that I think we are looking at, either jointly or separately, is to mitigate to some degree this artificial advantage, to take away, let's say a country devalues its currency by 25%. That's a price differential that is huge. All of our remedies are designed in some fashion to mitigate that artificial delta. But the point that we try to make to policy makers in Washington is think about that. A country has a 25% undervalued currency. That means we have to be 25% better than that just to stay in the market. That means we have to be more productive, more efficient. We have to produce a better quality product. We have to provide better service just to have a chance to keep the business. That's unrealistic and it's unfair. So we have various solutions and concepts, but all of them come back to how do we narrow that artificial gap that they've created through their exchange rate policy.
Well, I also personally think that that's a huge component of it. You've got the whole world on tax value added in the United States not on it. You know, that sort of puts it on steroids because if they're exporting, they don't pay tax at home. And if we're trying to export, we're paying tax, and then you have to pay tax in the country itself when it's, you know, when it's introduced into that economy. So we do have some mountains to climb.
Tom, go ahead.
No, this isn't the tax reform coalition. That could be another press conference. But I think with some of the same people here. But that is an issue. Obviously, it's one of the factors that affects our competitiveness. There are others, but we have advantages too in terms of just the overall efficiency of the American workforce, access to capital, access to raw materials, access to energy and newly affordable energy. You know, there are reasons that the U.S. industry, certainly the steel industry, and we've got representatives of the industry in this state that are very adept and very competitive internationally. It gives us a basis to be able to fight and win. But the playing field has to be level, and if someone's going to give themselves 25% or more advantage, it's pretty tough to overcome that, even with efficiencies and a better energy standards, a better cost of energy.
And at the risk of being redundant and belaboring this point, it's such an important issue. There is a structural reason that we run $600–700 billion annual trade deficits. It's not because we don't know what we're doing, we're uncompetitive. It's not because some producers in Asia are just dramatically better than we are. There are normal competitive differentials. We accept that. But the reason we run $700 billion trade deficits is because there are structural factors, such as currency devaluation, that are driving that number. Take that out of the system, along with a few other things, as you mentioned, and let's see who wins the fight. I would venture to say the American economy, or American manufacturing base, will hold its own with anybody under a fair playing system.
Where's the current language trending at this point in TPP?
Thus far, the negotiators haven't brought this up. So there's not even a negotiating text right now.
There's not a chapter that relates to currency?
No, we think you should insert it. And we think it's, we've seen trade agreements become more sophisticated. They no longer just address tariffs. We've gone through a process where they address labor standards and environmental standards. This is really, I think, the next step to address all the impediments to free trade. And at least from our perspective as in the auto industry, the biggest impediment to free trade is currency manipulation. So it needs to be addressed in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the United States is not alone. A number of other economies in the Trans-Pacific Partnership are also negatively impacted by currency manipulation, like Canada, Mexico to some degree, New Zealand, Australia. So there are natural allies that we believe would join with the United States if the United States would bring this to the table.
The administration knows it has to deal with the currency issue to get a trade agreement done. There are versions of Trade Promotion Authority out there that have some instructions on including a currency discipline. We think they should be stronger, but no bill, no trade agreement will get by the U.S. Congress unless it addresses this issue. The administration's aware of that. How they strategize about when they deal with this issue versus dealing with access to Japanese ag or something that starts getting some negotiating strategy they don't always share with us. Wish they would, but this is clearly an issue the administration knows it has to deal with and has to be dealt with before they can get either Trade Promotion Authority or a TPP standalone through the Congress.
I like your 3-question litmus test about currency manipulators. Just curious, how many of the countries involved in TPP negotiations would fail that litmus test?
So as of today, snapshot, 1 or perhaps 2. You need better transparency measures than you have today. Though economies like Japan in the past would have, well, they wouldn't meet that test today, but they would have for a number of periods over the past few decades. And countries, as Augie mentioned, that may join the TPP in the future would clearly meet that test. So as Korea contemplates joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or China thinks about joining it in the future, they would have to consider the implications of the test as well.
You get one guess as to who that certain country is. Any other questions? Well, if not, we can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. We hope you found this informative. We are more than prepared to respond to follow-up questions that you might have, a desire for additional information. I think we all have press releases and a press packet that shows how to reach us. And we appreciate whatever support that you can give us as we attempt to get this issue rectified.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.